Good morning. I've got something very unusual for you this morning, and it's something that I stumbled across very recently. It's a paper I did, one-page little submission I did for a class that was taught by Howard Hendricks. This is when I was a senior at Dallas Theological Seminary, so it was 1972. Gosh, 24 years ago? 54 years ago? 24 years? 34 years? It's strange to think about how many years have passed by, but I still remember the class. I liked it so much because he was my favorite professor. He was a wonderful communicator. If you ever, you'd be well rewarded by just looking him up, Howard Hendricks. He was just a master communicator on every level. And so I took all of the electives he taught, and one of them was this course called, this little short special group, as a seminar on discipleship. And it was limited to 10 people. And you had to sign up early. We met for 2 hours from 6 in the morning to 8 in the morning on a Wednesday. I still remember that. And Howard, so Howie, Prof, as we call him, would start us off, and he'd show us how to do this. But the whole idea was to pull principles from the Gospels on discipleship. It was about that, the whole idea, using the Gospels to glean principles in discipleship. And then having shown us, then each of us would have our own lesson to do. And so when it came my turn, I did a thing on Jesus, his use of the boat in the Sea of Galilee, and I called it Jesus' Floating Seminary. And it's what it was. So I'm going to show it to you up here, and there's an image here of what it looks like, and it's really silly looking at first, but it's a little sheet. I wish I'd brought you the original of it. And I had 4 little scenes. You see, I gave up a great career in graphics design. Though I will say, I do artwork, and this is some of my artwork, like these kinds of things here. So I do artwork, and so it's not as bad as that. This is a thing I just did just recently. It's just a little pastel. But that said, though, so I did Jesus' Floating Seminary, and it was the first one was the calling of Peter and Andrew and James and John, and then the storm calmed. Third, walking on water, and fourth, Jesus appearing after his resurrection. And I found that there was a principle that could be gleaned from each one of these events, and that's what I want to take you through. And so I said key in on 4 didactic experiences from the Sea of Galilee, and the first 3 incidents focus primarily on the underlined passages. And so the calling of Peter and Andrew and James and John appears in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, but I particularly stress Luke in that account. The calming of the storm, Matthew, Mark, Luke, I used the Markan account for that. And then the third one, walking on water, again the 3, Matthew, Mark, and John, I used Matthew, and then I used John. It's the only appearance of this account in John 21. So what I thought I'd do with you is to kind of walk you through and just pull these things out with you and just kind of talk you through some of these thoughts and principles. Now, the Sea of Galilee, it's the second deepest, lowest lake in the world, the other being, the deeper one being the Dead Sea. It's about 210 on average feet below seawater level. So so here's the Dead Sea down below here, Salt Sea. And so it's about 13 miles and by 8, and so that's a small little thing, but so many things happened around that sea, and the Capernaum and Bethesda and Magdala and Tiberias and so forth. And so an image here of, again, there's Capernaum on the top and Tiberias, and this is where I almost drowned, right down here. This is kind of an interesting thing here. Yeah. Right here, this little area right here. That's another story. Ask me about it sometime. Yeah, a very strange thing. Experienced that, but it was a kibbutz camping area. And so all these little events, and it's amazing how many things, when you just think that are associated with these 4 events, but others as well, that take place around there. And he reveals himself in so many specific ways. But I call this floating seminary for various reasons, because it was very graphic. There are lessons that are to be learned in each of these events that we're going to see. Here are some photos of the Sea of Galilee. How many of you have been there and seen the sea? A good number of you? Yeah. It's well worth the effort, because somehow, as people like to describe it, going to the Holy Land, it kind of makes it takes it from black and white to color in a certain way, because you actually see the place, and it's another experience to read about it, but it's another thing to have been there, at least to get the feel for it. And the Sea of Galilee is pretty much as it was. Some images of the Sea of Galilee. It's very beautiful. This is a picture I took from the Arbel, from a hill in the morning. You see the little birds and all that, and it was just a sunrise. It was a particularly magical morning for me. So let's take a look at these 4. And so what I do is I had the first one, the calling of Peter and Andrew and James and John. What was the primary lesson learned here? So I'm going to take you to Luke chapter 5, verses 1 to 11. That's the one I'm going to focus on here. And now it happened that while the crowd was pressing around him and listening to the word of God, he was standing by the lake of Gennesaret, and he saw 2 boats lying at the edge of the lake. But the fishermen had gotten out of them and were washing their nets. And he got into one of the boats, which was Simon's, and asked him to put out a little way from the land. And he sat down and began teaching the people from the boat. Very clever. That's his amplification system, because the water would amplify his voice. And so it was a brilliant thing to do without microphones and so forth. It's the best way to do it. Teaching off the boat from the water, it magnified his voice. And he sat down and began teaching the people from the boat. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into the deep water and let down your nets for a catch." Now Simon, of course, objects. This isn't your area. You should stick with the message of salvation. Let those do most what they do best, and we're the fishermen. We know this lake very well. We've been doing this all our lives. We have a pretty good knowledge of what to do. And so he objects. In fact, he said, "Master, we worked hard all night and caught nothing." But here's the critical moment that sets Peter apart from most people. "But I will do as you say and let down the nets." Now that's a critical moment, isn't it? He says, "I don't agree with you. Why would you do that? Because we failed to do that, and you should stick with your area of expertise. But I'm going to do it anyway." So this primary lesson for me is that of obedience in spite of appearances to the contrary. And that's a huge lesson for us, isn't it? In your day, many times you feel prompted to do a thing, but you wonder why. It doesn't seem like the right thing to do. And you read the scriptures and so forth, and you have to wrestle with God and his authority. And does he really know what he's doing? Does this really make any sense? And trying to make sense out of him in our terms will never really work very well, because we only see a part of the whole picture in our lives. We have such a small fraction of what's really involved. But he will do as you say. And when they had done this, it tells us that they enclosed a great quantity of fish. So many, of course, that their nets began to break. Jesus his miracles were miracles of abundance. It's always this way. Just consider the making of the water into wine. It was 150 gallons of the stuff. And it was the best vintage ever made. I'll let you process that. It was a miracle. It was a miracle of time as well as of volume. It was a kingdom miracle of provision and so forth. So what he does in abundance. And so there was so many fish, in fact, they'd never seen anything like it. They enclosed a great quantity, and their nets began to break. So they signaled to their partners in the other boat for them to come and help them. And they came and filled both of the boats, so they began to sink. Now that's pretty impressive. Heavy, heavy load, overwhelming, overabundance. What am I going to do? They almost had another problem. But when Simon Peter saw that, what did he do? He saw something that made no sense. We said, this is beyond this. He's taking his own area of expertise and saying, "I knew nothing." And that's a lot of it we have to do. Is obedience requires us to trust him in spite of appearances to the contrary. And there are going to be times when the thing that God calls you to do won't make any sense. Yet he calls you to do it anyway. And he's going to give us evidences of this, but this is something that he revealed to them. He revealed something about himself. So each of these experiences, these four, Jesus reveals something about them, himself to them, that's unique. And in this particular case, about his authority and his knowledge and his capacity for provision. And when Simon Peter saw that, he fell down at Jesus' feet saying, "Go away from me, for I'm a sinful man." There was something about the holiness of him. This so captivated him that this was more than just an intellectual awareness. I guess he can do this. But realization of the presence of power, of holiness, of authority, of majesty, of dominion. And this was a revelatory moment, wasn't it, that it revealed it. And I think it's a good thing for you to pray for the grace that God would reveal himself to you in new ways. And the way that that's going to happen, though, will be through obedience. Because if it were not for his obedience, he wouldn't have had that divine disclosure. You may have heard me say this before. Obedience is the portal of divine disclosure. If you want to know him better, do what he calls you to do. You see, so this is why it says, if the one who has my word and keeps it is the one who will then, I will manifest myself to him or disclose myself to him, my Father will do so. So you want to know him better, do what he calls you to do, and it's going to be in times when it makes no sense. So one of the things I have to do in my obedience at this juncture in my life especially is every day turn grumbling into gratitude. You see, things I don't want to do, and be grateful for it because it's my call and my mission. So obedience, but I'm not going to know him better unless I press on. And he's always going to bump up the ante, what that looks like. So for amazement had seized him and all his companions because of the catch of fish which they had taken. And so were James and John, sons of Zebedee, who were partners with Simon. And Jesus said to Simon, "Do not fear, from now on you will be catching men." And when they brought their boats to land, they left everything because they knew he was the one who would provide for them beyond anything that they could have imagined or seen. So that's the first one there, the calling of the 12. And then the second one, the calling of Peter, James, Andrew, and James and John. So the principle, there's a powerful principle of particularly related to trust and obedience. And that's an application that I would make. And then the second one, given the limit of our time, is the calming of the storm. There's my little help, help. And so I choose the Mark chapter 4, verses 35 to 41 session here. So in Mark 4 and 35, on that day when evening came, he said to them, "Let us go over to the other side." So he left the crowd with them, and he took him along with them in the boat, just as he was, and other boats were with him. And there arose a fierce gale of wind, and the waves were breaking over the boat, so much that the boat was already filling up. You know what happens with the Sea of Galilee? It's like the wind comes in from the west through between these two mountains, and it's like again because of the conditions of that, it's like a saucer. The water can become very violent. That's what almost killed me when I was swimming in there, and there's no warning almost, and it just all of a sudden becomes violent and overwhelming. And this is one of those experiences that one has. When I almost drowned, when that happened to me, I said, "What people might say, what a man of God! He would drown in the Sea of Galilee." Imagine that. But it was a. I promise you, that was a revelatory moment for me, and my whole life did pass before me, and because I was going out to this raft. It was about maybe a tenth of a mile, not even that, from the shore in the southern, and everything was fine and calm. And on my way back, all of a sudden, wham! Out of nowhere, and I couldn't get any progress or purchase at all. I couldn't make any progress, and I was, after a long time, I was getting exhausted, and but it kept I couldn't get closer to the land I could see in the distance. Next thing I knew, so I saw my life pass before me, and then I realized I was on borrowed time to accomplish unfinished business. And the next thing I knew, I was on the shore. By the rocks. I couldn't make a purchase, but then the next thing I knew, I got on top of them. I don't know how I got there. And then I looked back and I'm on borrowed time. But the point here is that this was a revelatory moment for them, as it was for me. This fierce gale of wind, the waves were breaking over the boat so much that the boat was already filling up. Jesus himself was in the stern, asleep on the cushion, and they woke him and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" I don't know what they had in mind for him to do. Help him with bailing it out? Because what he did is not what they were expecting him to do. And so he reveals something about himself again, in another revelation. He says he got up and he rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Hush, be still." Now that's pretty impressive, you see, to reveal himself. And this reveals his authority. And when I look at the ministry of Jesus, it reveals his authority over 4 spheres and 4 realms. The first realm is the authority over nature. He has power over the natural world. He could speak to the wind and to the wave and says, "Quiet down." And it suddenly quiets down. And that just doesn't happen. And once again, they were impressed. But he also, secondly, has the authority not only over nature, but over disease. A third area over demons. And the fourth one's over death. So his authority is all comprehensive. It's over nature, over demons, over disease, and over death. And you can see the miracles that he did associated with his life revealed out all 4 of those areas. And so, hush, be still. And the wind died down and it became perfectly calm. And he said to them, why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith? And what was their response? They became very much afraid and said to one another, "Who then is this that even the wind and the sea obey him?" They realized that they're in the presence of the transcendent, of holiness, of awe, of majesty, of wonder. And he reveals his authority to them in a new way that was not seen before. So it's another aspect of the Floating Seminary. So it's a lesson about his authority, it seems to me, that's particularly evident here. And then the third one is walking on water. And so I choose the Matthew account of that, Matthew 14, 22 to 23. There's my little movement. See, you see him moving along. he liked it. It was stupid, but I still remember drawing these things. This is goofy, but it worked out all right. So what's the primary lesson? Walking on water. So Matthew 14, 22 to 23 is our text. Immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go ahead of them to the other side, while he sent the crowds away. Often he would use the boat to get away from the pressing multitudes. And it was also to have an encounter with his disciples. And they didn't know that he had an appointment with them in the sea for another lesson. After he had sent the crowds away, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. And when it was evening, he was there alone. But the boat was already a long distance from the land, battered by the waves, for the wind was contrary. So it was a violent time, not unlike the other time. And in the 4th watch, so it's about 3 a.m, he came to them walking on the sea. What a strange thing to just suddenly they look in the distance and see someone on this surface of the water walking on the sea, in this violent sea, but he's going right to them. And that would get my attention, you see. When the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were, what? Terrified. Do you notice the other 2 times they were terrified? Here's a third time. They are terrified of him. All 3 of these events, there's a holy terror that's associated with this revelation of Jesus, because it's more than just intellectual, isn't it? There's an experience that they're having, and they don't know what they're looking at, but it frightens them. And so it says it's a ghost, and they cried out in fear, but immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take courage. It is I, do not be afraid," as he's done before. He would do that again. Take courage, it's me. Don't be afraid. So Peter, this is one of his better moments at first. He said to him, if it is you, command me to come to you in the water. Now, that's a pretty bold thing to claim. I don't know what even put that in his mind. I would have said, come on to the boat. Instead, command me to come into the water. Peter was very bold about those things, and it's one of the things I admire about him. It's one of his greatest strengths, and it's one of his greatest weaknesses. He's impetuous as well. But here is something he starts off very well. He got out of the boat. What faith that required. What trust that required, didn't it? So he's radical, and his love for Jesus is so great that even though he was terrified of what he sees, he wants to be with him in that storm and in that situation. And he actually walked on water, and he came toward Jesus, and he began doing well. And then, of course, we know the story. Seeing the wind, he became frightened. So it's what you set your eyes on that will affect you. So he was looking at Jesus. As long as he fixed his eyes on Jesus, he was safe. As soon as he started fixing himself on the adversaries, the adversities, he began to sink. You see the obvious lesson there of trust is involved here. So that you have to learn to trust him and fix your eyes on Jesus in spite of the winds and waves and adversities and opposition that you know you're going to encounter in a world that's filled with adversity, because the world is no friend of grace. And the enemy of your soul, the spiritual warfare, the angels, Satan and his demons are no friends of grace. And even your own flesh, we have our own natural disposition to trust in our own resources rather than him. So again, it goes contrary to the world, the flesh, and the devil, doesn't it? Even to fix our eyes on Jesus, especially in the midst of the storms of life, and yet we're called to do so. Not only to do that, to be overcomers and to on the midst of that. So, but seeing the wind, he was frightened and began to sink, and he cried out, "Lord, save me." That was a rather quick prayer. It fascinates me with some people's lengthy prayers. For example, you ask them to pray over a meal or something like that, and they suddenly, it's their opportunity to give a long theological discourse. Keep it short, and sometimes you just don't, what's appropriate here is not a discourse here, and a rather short prayer, "Lord, save me." I mean, how much time did he have? And so he immediately, it tells us, that Jesus stretched out his hand and took hold of him and said to him, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" I see him looking at him while he's holding his hand. And that would be a powerful memory, wouldn't it, in your life? And so we all, I think, are granted special moments. If you look back and you have a sacred history, you're going to remember certain special moments in your life where he grabs you and you fixed your eyes on him and you realize, fix your eyes on him. Trust in him. He's worthy of it. And of course, when they got into the boat, what happened? The wind stopped. And those who were in the boat worshiped him, saying, "You are certainly God's son." Yet another revelation, a fear, awesome holiness. Who is this that even the wind and the waves obey him? And then the fourth one is in John. It's the only appearance there, and it's after his resurrection. And so here we are, and here's Jesus with the fire and the charcoal. And Jesus had already manifested himself to the disciples in Jerusalem on 2 occasions, John 20. And so we know about that. And he told them he was going to go up into Galilee. But why then were the disciples doing, and why did he manifest himself there? Why do you think was the attitude of the disciples at this point? So if I go to John chapter 21, 1 to 11, what we see is a portrait of another revelation. But this is going to be very similar to the very first encounter that they had with him on the boat, wasn't it? After these things, Jesus manifested himself again to the disciples at the Sea of Tiberias. And he manifested himself in this way. It's sometimes called Gennesaret, sometimes Tiberias. But it is this local place, this place where so much revelation took place. And he manifested himself in this way. Simon Peter and Thomas, called Didymus, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, and the sons of Zebedee, and 2 others of his disciples. So quite a number of them were together in the boat. And this being their profession, they went. Simon Peter said, I'm going fishing. And they said to him, we will also come with you. What they experienced was nothing they were expecting. And their attitude was, they had seen him twice, remember, in the upper room. Once before, when Thomas wasn't there, and then about a week later, and Thomas was there. So they knew about him. They knew he was going to go up there, but it was a vague thing. They didn't know what was going to come, so that they were not sure. So they go back to what they know best and return to that. And so the others decide to go with him, and they go into the boat, and they caught nothing that night. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? But when the day was now breaking, Jesus stood on the beach, yet the disciples didn't know it was Jesus. They saw him in the distance. And of course, this is the resurrected Christ. But remember, when he appears in those 40 days of appearances, he never manifested himself in his resurrected glory while he was on the earth. He would appear in different ways, and sometimes he could be confused with the gardener or someone else, and wasn't sure who he'd be. But in his glorified state now, if we were to see him as he is, of course, we'd be overwhelmed, and like John or Saul, when the road to Damascus, be overwhelmed. But here he looked like another man. And so the disciples didn't know it was Jesus. So he said to them, children, you don't have any fish, do you? A little suggestion there. You didn't get anything, did you, last night? They said, no. He said, cast the net on the right-hand side of the boat and you will find a catch. And they did. This time it doesn't say, even though we fished all night, but there's something going on here, and their memories were being spurred. They cast, and they were not able to haul it in. Again, the same kind of thing, an overwhelming abundance that he provided. Therefore, that disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, and this would be John, it is the Lord. When Simon Peter heard it was the Lord, he put his outer garment on him. He was stripped for work, threw himself into the sea. He didn't waste any time. And the others come in the little boat, for they were not far from the land, but about 100 yards away, dragging the net full of fish. So when they got out on the land, they saw a charcoal fire already laid and fish placed on it. Jesus said to them, bring some of the fish which you have now caught. Simon Peter went up and drew the net to land, full of large fish, 153. It's interesting he gives that number, 153, very specific thing here. And people have tried to see symbolism in the number. I can't do it. But it just tells us a lot. And they were big fish. And although there were so many, the net was not torn. And so you have, again, a revelation very similar to their very first encounter with him when they got into the boat and left with him. And so his provision, come and have breakfast. And none of the disciples ventured to question, who are you? They knew it was the Lord. It was his signature. And Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them, and the fish likewise. This is now the third time that Jesus was manifested to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. So I go back to this text here, and there's a primary lesson that I see here, and it's a matter of recognition that this is the one who's called us to trust him. And in fact, when I look at these 4, I look at this way of his gift of provision. So in one word, for me, key principle, one would be obedience to the first one. The second would be authority. The third one would be trust. And the fourth one is his provision. I'll take care of you and provide for you in all your needs. And there are others lessons to be learned as well. But I'd like you to spend a little time on this and just to kind of choose one of these episodes, and which one speaks to you, or how do they all speak? In every instance, it is a revelation of his person, his power, his presence, his perfection. And so we see that he's looking at them and they're looking at him, and they realize that they're in the presence of the authority of the living God. Who is this one? So I would ask you to pray in yourself for a greater vision of the glory of God. To have a clearer vision for that. And it's going to take a bit of risk in doing so. But you want to know him not just by way of hearsay, by way of acquaintance. What insights did you glean from this? Was there a particular aha moment any of you had at your table that revealed something about him?
Yeah, none of us are as smart as you at 25. Had you fleshed out your 3 questions you always tell us to ask at that point in your life?
No. Those 3 questions are a pretty recent origin.
Okay.
Really, I think it's only about, what do you think, Stuart, about 2 years ago? I think that's about right. And suddenly it occurred to me, those 3 questions. And I actually did a little series on the questions that Jesus asked, and there's quite a number of them, about 130 or so. And he rarely asked, when he was asked a question, he rarely answered it. Very rarely did it. He'd answer it with another question to them. You tell me what authority he had, and then I'll tell you what. But the interesting thing is, so the use of questions, but I was struck at one point. I don't know what brought it to my mind, what was the very first question that he asked, and then what was the last? And both of them would naturally be in John's gospel because the synoptics don't include the earlier Judean ministry and the later accounts. And so then what do you seek became that question. And then, of course, who do you say I am in the Caesarea Philippi? And then the third one is you love me more than these. It kind of came together. But I have to tell you, I've been using those 3 questions very, very consistently. In fact, next week I'm going to be going over the spiritual renewal cards with you, a special session. And we're going to be just kind of walking you through the entirety of that, just in one session. And those 3 questions have now been added to that collection of cards that were not there before. But I have to tell you, I have been pretty consistent about using those 3 questions ever since. And I've done it at least 4 times today so far. So it doesn't take any time to just review them, you see. So why not do that? But it's a mini recalibration. What am I looking for? What do I want more than anything else? Who is Jesus to me right now? And do I love him more than other things, you see? So it comes down to this. Again, and then the connection, may I know you more clearly, love you more dearly, follow you more nearly, made sense to me as well. And then Chuck helped me with the other one because trust the Father, abide in the Son, walk by the Spirit, also related to know you more clearly, love you more dearly, follow you more nearly. So that was good too. Any insights that you got at your table? Here's one Larry's got. We're glad that Larry that is well.
Amen. Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate that.
And you entrusted yourself in the Lord's hands. And again, a man who is pursuing Jesus is immortal until God's purpose is fulfilled.
That's true. God is good.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that comes to mind as we talked about these incidents today and these illustrations is that obedience is the key to blessing. Very
it really is,
simple.
isn't it? It's
not easy always, but
no,
it is the key to blessing.
It is. And in each case, there's something that he reveals that is kind of overwhelming. It's transcendent. It's terrifying in a certain way. Who is this then that even the wind and the sea obeys? What manner of man? Depart from me, I'm a sinful man. And they marveled at him. And so in each case, something was amplified about their encounter with Jesus and the realization that they were taking him in a way that was not really as serious as they needed to. But in that moment, for example, with the walking on the water, it's so clear that he succeeded in walking on the water. And then he saw the waves. And that isn't that an exemplar for our lives as well? The waves are there. But if you fix your eyes on Jesus, then you have an ability to overcome. And so this world is full of turmoil and twists and tribulations, filled with them, unpredictable things that are going to happen in our lives. But as long as I fix my eyes on Jesus, walk in obedience and trust on a moment-by-moment basis. But as soon as I do that, I love the brevity of and zeal of Peter's prayer. Lord, save me, as he's going down. But he did, and but it would be good for me to learn. And this is the whole thing too. Go back 54 years. What did I know then? But you see, in comparison, there are new things that I see, but it's the same lessons, it's the same principles, it's the same stuff. So in one way, I only know a bit more, but it's really, the whole process is, it's original research into unexplored territory as you're moving into this. And the more you learn about him, the more you realize you don't know about him. And the more you realize how great he is. And so, if anything, there's a greater humility. I call it epistemic humility, which means that you realize how little you really know. We know nothing. And we like to think we are masters of... So it's funny, I got a degree called Master of Theology, which is a wonderful, a delicious irony. No one's a master of theology. As soon as you think you know something, you don't know it, you see. So there's a certain arrogance about us, isn't there? What other insight did you get? Who else? Here's Jack, yeah.
One thing I mentioned I thought was kind of fascinating is that when he said he began to sink, when I get in the water, I sink.
Yeah.
The fact that he began to sink speaks to this level of doubt we have in some way.
Yes.
I was trying to figure that out a little bit.
Yeah. And those circumstances, again, it's a question of the circumstances right around him, because what he's doing in walking in the water makes no sense at all. No sense at all. But that's what faith is. It goes contrary to the wisdom of this world and invites us. But it's intriguing as well. When he got into the boat, that's when the waves stopped. He got it up, nope, they're gone. There's a power, a majesty, and authority about this one. So wouldn't it be good if we could ask for the divine disclosure? But you see, in asking for divine disclosure, we realize we're actually never going to get that unless we entrust ourselves to him enough to take the risks of obedience. And he's going to bump up the ante of risk as you go along. Because as you've heard me say in the past, yesterday's faith is today's sight. You've heard that before, I'm sure. But what I mean by that is, what took risk before, now you're going to need more, because the more you know, the more you need to press on. So it's going to take more. But here's the process. He must increase, and we must decrease. It's always been so. And so you can't find your life unless you lose your life, but then you discover your life by finding his life. And that is true in the natural world. The more I'm studying, and as I study the world, whether it's the microcosm or the midicosm or the macrocosm, I'm discovering it's filled with spiritual lessons all throughout it about what it means to lose one's life or to sacrifice or to give oneself away. It's found in the natural world in so many incredible ways, in nurturing and all the other kinds of connections that you have, that it's amazing. And so that's why it's not an accident that Jesus used the natural world and that the Gospels use the world itself and all its elements as illustrations of spiritual truth, because they're there. But we won't see them unless we choose to look through them and to see him. So we have to have the eyes to see and the ears to hear. And when you do that, everything is a pointer. I think it was Oswald Chambers who said, nature to a saint is sacramental. Yeah.
Ken, the thing that strikes me this morning is that relatively simple lessons learned from meditating on those four passages. So the point that you actually come out of it with the four things that you said. But we don't do much of that because distraction in this world is more, right now, life is more complex for all of us than it's ever been on planet Earth because of phones and passwords and everything else.
Yes.
And we don't do that. And
No.
so we miss the beauty of the messaging that you've described to us today.
Yes.
Because we don't make it a priority to actually separate ourselves from the scramble of a day to the meditation, even for a few minutes, to take away great lessons.
That's right. Fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of faith. So fix your eyes on him, not on the other runners, and run with obedience the race that's set before you.